Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we are joined by Jon Ferguson. As founding pastor of Community Christian Church in Chicago and the driving force behind the NewThing network, Jon is a humble servant leader in the world of faith and community building. Under Jon's guidance, Community Christian Church became one of America's largest churches. Jon has become a leader in the Christian church globally, with thousands of pastors joining the NewThing movement and looking to him for leadership and guidance. Jon is passionate about empowering others, fostering collaboration, and helping people find their way back to God. Today, Jon will share his invaluable insights on servant leadership and how it can help you start, build, and grow a team that can have a lasting impact.
You have such a crazy journey. Tell us what happened and how you got here.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate. I grew up in a great Christ-following home, and I had parents who not only professed to believe in Jesus, but just lived it out. I mean, their life matched their words. And so the upside of that is it was an incredible childhood. The downside of that is I have no excuse. Like, there's no reason for me to not have it good right now. And so it really set me on a trajectory where, I knew I wanted to follow Jesus at an early age. I was probably about 10 when I made it public. And in our church, it was old school. Man, you had to walk down the aisle and in front of everybody profess your faith in Christ. At the end of that aisle, at the front of the church gathering, there was my dad. So that was kind of cool. And then,
was your dad a pastor?
Yes, my dad was a pastor. Yeah, right. And so I was baptized right then and there. I mean, they didn't waste any time.
Wow.
They took you around back. They put a robe on you and you're dunked in that moment right then and there.
Wow.
And so, it set me on a great trajectory. And, later in high school, continued to follow Jesus. There were ups and downs, doubts, some rebellions here and there. But overall, stayed on a pretty good path. Had some great friends in my youth group, and then eventually decided I wanted to go into ministry. And that's what I did, and started a church with my brother and a handful of friends when I was 23.
Wow.
Yeah, one of my friends was 21. My brother was the elder statesman on the team at 25. It's incredible. I mean, I often say I can believe people showed up for the first time. I can't believe they came back.
Right.
I mean, didn't they look around and go, okay, I've seen children's church. Now we're the adults. You know what I mean?
How many people showed up that first week?
Well, we did. Okay, this was in the era of direct mail marketing. And actually, we did phone marketing too, telemarketing.
Yeah.
Haven't said that in probably 15 years. But so we called literally 50,000 people.
Holy moly.
Yeah. We made 50,000 calls over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks. And then we followed that up with 5 pieces of direct mail, all intended to invite people to come to the first Sunday. And then on that first Sunday, there was 465 people that showed up for church.
No way.
No lie. Yeah, 465 people showed up. So I don't know if that would be effective now. I don't know what telemarketing would look like.
Is that what you were expecting? That many people?
I hate to say it because, the data at that time would have said if you send 5 pieces of mail to 50,000 people, then you should get 1% return.
Okay.
And so 465 is not far from 1%. If we'd had 500, we'd been right on it. So in some ways, I think we probably did. And again, we were doing small groups and some community outreach activities, that sort of thing as well. But part of that too is I was 23. I thought, we could do anything and everything.
Right.
And so, if 1,000 people would have shown up, I probably been like, oh, this is the way it works.
Wow. That's amazing.
Well, don't ask me what happened after that.
What? How many people week 2?
Yeah, right. That's the question. It was probably about half of that week 2. And then a funny story is, July 4th weekend of that year, which was 1989. Church is 33 years old, be 34 years old actually in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
July 4th weekend, one of the pastor's, most nightmarish weekends, right? Everybody's out of town. Everybody's on vacation. It's slightly better maybe than the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's. And so we're going, okay, I wonder if anybody's going to be there. And hardly anybody was there. We're in this room that seats 400. There's about 65 adults in the room. And afterwards, I'm huddled up in the corner, rewriting my resume, thinking, okay, this is over. We're done.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But we survived. And, God was good. Definitely, got us through some crazy mistakes that we made along the way. But he was faithful, and here we are 3 years later. So
what was it like doing it with your brother, him being involved, and he's still involved today, right?
Yeah. Great question. Part of it is, okay, we grew up together, and he was 2.5 years older than me. And so it was kind of like the perfect age spread, I think, where Yeah, admittedly, I'm very competitive. I hate to say this. He could beat me in almost any sport. If I was ever to defeat him in something like in one-on-one basketball or something else, it was almost like the world shifted on its axis slightly. Like it felt wrong to me even when I would win,
Right.
but it was so seldom. But we were just great friends, good friends, did things together growing up. We had our D&J lawn service when we were kids, Dave and John, and went to college together. We were roommates for a while, so we always got along, and it just made sense when we started dreaming of what we might want to do with our lives and the idea of starting a church. It was like, let's just do this together. I mean, why not? That'll be fun.
That's amazing. So as it went through the years, what was the vision back then for where it would be? I mean, did you even have a vision for 10 years later where it would be?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
what was that vision?
This is the upside and downside of starting when you're 23. Because, we've had steady growth. That wasn't like explosive growth, from the beginning, but always like that, probably 10 to 15. I think maybe a couple of years is like 15 to 18% growth, but usually in that like 10% year after year kind of growth. And so, 5 years into it, we were probably like, 400 or 500 consistently on a weekend. A lot of people engaged in small groups, doing some pretty cool things in the community. But people would say, did you ever think that it would be like this? And of course, I was 28 at the time. I'd be like, well, honestly, I thought it would be a lot more than this, but I had no idea how hard it would be.
Right.
So, so it was just slow but steady kind of growth over the years. I forgot the question you asked me, actually. It was
just around what the vision was for 10 years.
Well, the thing is, we actually did. We had a written out vision. There was 4 of us sitting in a hen house restaurant in central Illinois, just out of college. And we sat down and crafted this 3-phase vision that honestly, like to this day, we still see that as our vision for a community Christian church. And phase 1 was we wanted to be an impact church. And that meant we wanted to reach people who were far from God, people that were facing a Christless eternity. That compelled us. Second phase of that vision was we wanted to be a reproducing church. So we didn't want to just start one church. We felt like, we could reach more people and have a greater impact if we multiplied over and over again and had to impact churches and communities all over the country and maybe even beyond. And our idea of an impact church is not only one that's reached people who are far from God, but it's one that, like, if it suddenly disappeared, like, the community would notice and go, wow, we were a better community with that church here. What happened?
Right.
So we wanted to have that kind of an impact. So phase 2 was to be a reproducing church. And then phase 3 would be if God was so blessed that we could be a catalyst for a movement. And that was the idea that, maybe we could have churches both domestically, globally, and that, this thing could just take off and we'd see a move of God like we've not seen in our lifetimes. So that was our 3-phase vision that we wrote up months before we ever even had a small group or services or anything.
And you've basically stayed true to that the whole time.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, by God's grace, we have. And it's the kind of vision that you never complete,
Right.
of course. But it's kind of like the Great Commission. You never complete that either. At least it doesn't look like in our lifetimes it'll happen. But we continue to pursue that.
So you're in your 20s, you're starting out, steady growth along the way.
Yep.
Was there anyone that came alongside you from like a mentorship or like influence standpoint that you looked to from afar that was like, oh man, hey, I'm just learning along the way from these people?
Absolutely. A couple people come to mind immediately. Like I'd say 3 people. One, Lyle Schaller. Lyle Schaller lived in Naperville. He wrote probably 60 or more books on church life. He was a United Methodist, but just a brilliant guy. And Lyle was just kind of an older guy even when we first got to know him. And he'd always wear a white V-neck T-shirt, usually with like some food stains on it somewhere. But he lived in Naperville, and his wife, Agnes, sometimes they would have us over for brownies, and she could make some mean brownies. But Lyle actually was, at one point, I think it was the Los Angeles Times, named him one of the most influential church leaders in America.
Wow.
He wasn't super well known, but he was absolutely brilliant and influenced so many people. And one of the things that Lyle would say to us from time to time, he'd say, you know what your guys' problem is? And he didn't go to our church, but he would show up on occasion. He'd say, my vision for your church is bigger than your vision is for your church.
Wow.
Which was a little like, we were competitive enough. It's like, oh yeah? Well, but there were other, bits of wisdom he dropped on us from time to time that were just super helpful. Really brilliant guy. The other person I would say, Carl George, another guy out of the Fuller Institute in Pasadena, wrote a number of books on church growth and just strategies for church development at that time that was super helpful. One other guy would be Lyman Coleman. His brother was Robert Coleman, who wrote Master Plan of Evangelism.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people know about Robert, but not many people know about Lyman. But Lyman gave his life to helping pastors start and lead and equip people to hold and facilitate small groups that would include believers and non-believers. He believed from the beginning that if you set a context like that, that's safe for people who are far from God, that they'll actually interact on Scripture and the stories, see themselves in the stories of Scripture, and eventually find their way back to God. As a matter of fact, real quick, our mission statement is helping people find their way back to God.
Wow.
And Lyman Coleman is the one that gave us that, because we were at one of his conferences, and he gets super passionate. Tears would well up in his eyes, and he would retell the story of the prodigal son. And then he would say, there are prodigals in every one of our communities who desperately need to find their way back to God. And as soon as we heard that, we're like, okay, that's it. Find your way back to God. That's going to be our mission statement.
That's amazing.
That was about 18 months into the life of the church. Yeah.
So I think one of the things that people see probably when they look at you at first is there's this mega church pastor and life has been easy. You started this when you're in your 20s, and now look at you 30 years later and everything is perfect. Thousands of people attending. You've written a bunch of books, all this kind of stuff. There had to have been speed bumps. Like it can't have been this easy, right?
No.
No. Give us an example of some of those speed bumps.
Right. Great question. Some of the most obvious ones come along as the financial speed bumps. Probably one of the first times we really hit one of those would be like 2007, 2008, which was, that's a pretty good run from 89. Like we literally had probably 15 to 18 years where, things were fairly smooth. It wasn't easy. We were young and we made mistakes. But overall, it was a pretty smooth ride. And so when the financial crisis hit then, and we had to go through some really tough decision-making processes, and had to, let go of some staff. We had to cut back on some of our plans. And I think part of what made that so hard is we hadn't gone through hardly anything like that before. And we've had, since then, there's been a couple of times like that. I think personally, in some ways, just like always being in sort of a leadership and responsibility role from the age of 23, that is something that I don't think I've always even gauged or understood the full impact of that. I think I'm still figuring that out.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah. So on that, what are some of the leadership lessons that you think that you've learned along the way that you think people should be thinking through in their own life?
Well, on a personal level, just to be honest with you, the COVID was tough for so many people. And so I hit again, fairly smooth ride, challenging seasons. I have two kids, they're young adults, the teen years with them, raising children. My wife has just been incredibly supportive throughout all of this, and she's an amazing person too. So, it's hard to think about, okay, what were the challenges of the course of like 33 years? But one of the biggest ones probably was in COVID. And I think part of that is this idea of being in a role of responsibility for so long. I don't know that I realized that I was already running on empty, and my tank was fairly depleted. I wasn't doing some of the things that I know I needed to do to replenish myself and take care of myself. And in the spring, going into the summer of 2020, I hit a wall. Never experienced anything like that before. I always was able, I'm super competitive, love leadership, love leading meetings, love communicating, love talking. And for the first time, so many of those things that I always loved to do just felt like brutally hard work. Wow. I wasn't looking forward to any of it. And I just like, what is wrong with me? I've never experienced that before. I've told people, I've always been able to kick it into fifth gear. And it was almost like if you're, driving a stick shift, it's like you're grinding. I could not find fifth gear. Right. Well, here, you like basketball.
Yeah.
It's almost like, when you're on the basketball team, if you're like a hooper, if you love to play ball, you want to be the guy that gets the ball, right? And take that last shot, the winning shot. It was almost like I didn't want the ball anymore. Does that help you?
Yeah.
And I was like, I never felt that way before. And so it was tough. I just remember being on the phone call with my brother early one morning. I'm like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but I think I just got to stop. I can't do this right now. And he's like, well, just stop. And I'm like, okay, yeah, right.
Is that a good or bad thing that he said just stop?
Well, it's very typical of my brother, which it's great, but it's very task focused too. He's not thinking about necessarily the implications of just stopping. But it was what I needed to hear though too, because I think he knew. I mean, we know each other so well. He's like, oh, if he's saying this, like this is like real. We got to like do something. And so I did. I stopped for about 5 or 6 weeks. Just pretty much stopped everything. Started reading anything and everything on burnout. Pete Scazzaro was super helpful to me, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Wayne Cordero wrote a book years ago, Leading on Empty. I felt like it was like reading me. Went to sought some therapy, for probably the better part of a year. Started putting in some practices that should have been in place a long time ago, paying more attention to Sabbath, just like rule of life stuff about like, oh no, this hour in the morning of quiet and reflection isn't just like optional that I do like fairly often. It needs to be like a daily deal. And so I would, I feel great now, but that was a tough season, man.
Wow.
It was weird.
So when you think through all of that season and the things that you're dealing with, do you think people around you were feeling the effect of that, or were you able to hide it? How did it affect other people?
That's a great question. So I don't know if you know anything about Enneagram. I'm Enneagram 3. And so
me too.
Are you really? Okay.
Yeah, with a wing of 2.
Me too.
Oh boy, we're really similar.
Well, okay, so like, all right, I probably, and this is just full disclosure, I care more about people thinking I'm successful than actually even being successful.
Yeah.
I mean, in my heart of hearts, there's a part of me that's the dark side, right?
Right.
And so the last thing I wanted to do was let anybody know that there's anything wrong. I'm great. I'm fine. Are you kidding me? We'll get through this. And so that was one of the first times, I think, in my life where it was like, no, I just had to be like brutally honest, say, no, I'm not okay. No, I can't do this, and I need help.
Wow.
So yeah, it was different.
When you're going through all of this, obviously starting in church was a life-changing moment. Dealing with that crisis is a life-changing moment throughout COVID. Were there any other times throughout that 30-year period of just life-changing moments, or even before that?
Well, I mean, I always say one of the most life-changing moments for me was just being born in the family I was born in, because that, immediately gave me parents that just love Jesus authentically, and you can't really replace that. And then it also meant that I was the younger brother to the individual that I ended up doing all this with for the rest of my life. So those had massive implications as soon as I arrived on this scene.
Right.
In addition to that, though, I think there's just been seasons throughout the church where, we had to make decisions. We went from one location to 2 locations. We had one of our youth pastors approach us and say, hey, I think I'd like to start a church. And we were like, no, I don't think we want you to do that. We like you as our youth pastor. Turns out, though, God had something else in mind. And that was the first church plant. And now NewThing, the church planting mission that we have, there's over 6,000 churches globally that are connected to it one way or another. We didn't start all of them, but they all kind of have the same values of multiplication and helping people find their way back to God. So those are, pivotal moments. At the moment, you don't necessarily know it, but looking back, yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Wow. So throughout all of this, one of the main themes of this podcast is servant leadership, right? And you've been in a position where you've been led really well, you've led really well a lot of people. On the flip side, when you think of servant leadership, what do you think of?
Yeah, great question. First image comes to mind of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, and just the humility that took in that moment, when you can only imagine all that was in his mind and all the pressure he was feeling, and yet he still had the presence of mind to serve in that moment. I just hope that I would even maybe be a shadow of that in a similar situation or in any situation. So I always think of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. I also think of something that Andy Stanley, in one of his books, I can't remember which one it is, he said, you need to look to people's potential, not their performance. And that's always kind of stuck with me. We talk about having what we call I, C, and U conversations. We say the 4 most important letters in the alphabet are I, C, and U. And so I think a servant leader is someone who doesn't gauge somebody just on their performance, but on the potential that they see in them. I mean, Joseph, what's his last name? it escapes me right now, wrote a book, Organic Community, Joseph Myers. And he said the number one question a potential leader has is not what's in it for me, but it's why me. Think about that. It's not what's in it for me, but it's why. Because we kind of think, I got to convince this person to lead, and I got to tell them all the great things that they're going to get out of leading. He suggests what they really want to know is, well, why do you think I can do this? Why are you picking me? It goes back to that I see in you. Look to the potential, not just their performance. And so I think if we look at people in that way, that may be one of the best ways we could truly serve them. I mean, Jesus did that all the time, right? And looked at Peter and saw this crazy fisherman that talked too much and always put his foot in his mouth and said, no, I see in you someone who could lead my church. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, Acts 1:8, you will receive power, right? When the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses. That's like one big I see in you statement to all of his followers before he left to go to the Father. And you're going to take this message to the ends of the earth. It's pretty profound stuff. So, I mean, there's lots of images of servant leadership, but I think being that kind of person that sees potential in others, I think is one of the best ways we can serve people.
As you're thinking of servant leadership and just leading an organization, sometimes leading an organization and leading individuals on that team, if you will, don't always align with the same direction. How do you deal with something like that?
How much time do we have? Going into some deep, dark waters now. Well, and I assume you mean what happens when someone just doesn't seem to be in alignment with the organization?
Yeah, like the I see in you. How do you I see in you somebody, but also help lead an organization well? And sometimes it's realizing, hey, those two things aren't going in the same direction. They're actually going the opposite direction.
Right, great question. And I think it's twofold. One is if that person's going in a different direction and that's the direction God's calling them, then it's not in their best interest to stay with your organization. And I know that sounds a little pithy or maybe, I don't know, cliche or whatever. But if I'm going into conversations like that and I'm pretty much convinced that this person's probably not best to stay in the role and in the place that they are right now, if I can convince myself and remind myself that, okay, well, God's got a plan for their life. It might not be what I thought it was going to be. I need to help them find that plan, even if it's not what I want them to, which is really difficult. It's not awful conversations. I hate those kind of conversations. Right. But if I can convince myself this is still in their best interest, makes those conversations so much easier.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously those conversations aren't always easy, even after the fact. When you think through people leaving well and you separating well with people, how do you treat somebody well on the way out?
Great question. I think I always want people to leave and still say good things about us. And maybe there's some selfishness in that. There probably is. But it feels like if they're already going to leave, that's going to happen. You have their best interest at heart. You have the organization's best interest in heart. In our case, the church. Then you really have nothing to gain other than them leaving and you honoring them and them feeling good about what they experienced and you feeling good about what they experienced and departing on good terms. And that can be costly, literally in dollars and cents. It can be costly from like an ego standpoint when you really like to tell somebody like what you're maybe really feeling.
Right.
So it can be costly, but I think it can be more costly if you choose the other way and just kind of end in a way that's not honoring to them or the organization, because word gets out, it's repeated, and that doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah. So as you're leading through all these various scenarios, the good, the bad, your family is along for the ride in some respects. What's that been like for them? And how do you lead them well, but also let them lead well things that they're passionate about and not just be on the John train?
It's a great question too. You have kids, so it changes so much at the different ages that they are along the way. So when my kids were 10 and 12, we decided to move from the suburbs to the city. We felt like God was calling us into the city to help start new churches in the city and come alongside the good work that God was already doing. And so that I knew was going to be a pivotal moment for my kids. And it's one that I still look back on occasionally. Like, okay, was that the best thing for the family? How did all that come together? I still think it was. And we called it an adventure. Said, we feel like God's wanting us to do this. But, it meant my kids leaving their friends. It meant changing, school situations. It meant leaving the large youth group that they had access to in the suburbs and coming to the city where there was virtually nothing. And so leading through that was probably one of the biggest challenges, I think, from a family standpoint. Both my kids now look back and are glad that we did, and they would tell you that, but that wasn't easy. Now they're 26 and 23. They both live in New York. I was texting with my daughter on the way over here. So I think just open communication, I don't agree with all the things that they're doing and what they're saying necessarily, but, part of it I think is, are they a reflection of me? To a certain degree, but God created them in his image, not mine. So, you know what I mean? And I have to hold on to that loosely and just recognize that they're individuals. God's going to walk them through whatever they're going through. He's got them in their hands, and just continue to pray and keep open lines of communication. I feel like that maybe has been the one thing that's helped us kind of get through tough times, is always feeling like they could talk to me about whatever they wanted to talk about.
Right. So for people listening, what's one thing you'd say from an advice standpoint that they could do that's actually actionable to be a better servant leader?
Ooh, good question.
In their life, in their work, in any area.
All right. The first thing that came to mind when you said that was apprenticeship. And I think the idea, we think of leadership oftentimes as upfront, big crowd, that kind of leadership, when I feel like the most effective and best leadership is apprenticeship, just one-on-one. Me bringing somebody alongside me that I can, develop, challenge, encourage to become the best leader that they can become. And we always talk about these 5 steps of apprenticeship. Maybe you've heard this before.
No, what are they?
It's kind of corny, but it totally works. It goes like this, and I don't even remember where we got this from. I do, you help, we talk. So whatever you're apprenticing someone in, first I'm doing it, you help me. Or no, I'm sorry, I do, you watch is the first one. So you just observe, just watch what I do. Could be anything, right? And then let's get together and talk about what we just experienced. Second step is I do, you help, all right? Then I ask you to kind of get engaged. Let's give you a part of the leadership responsibility. And then we get together and talk about it again, all right? So I do, you watch, we talk, I do, you help, we talk. Then it's you do, I help, we talk. So I've switched. Now you're leading, I'm helping you, but we talk about what we're experiencing, what's working, what's not working, how can we improve? Right. All right, so that's step 3. Then step 4 is you do, I watch. Now I'm just watching, observing, but we still get together and talk about what we're experiencing. And then the last one is you do, someone else watches. Wow. And so you start that whole process over again. So it's 5 steps, it's multiplying leadership, but it's apprenticeship. That's what apprenticeship looks like, bringing somebody alongside you and you observing and then helping, and then me letting you lead, I watch, and then I help, and then I watch, and then eventually you bring somebody else alongside you to apprentice. That principle right there has been huge, I feel like, for us for as long as I can remember.
That's good. I'm glad we're recording this, because I'm going to rewatch this, take some notes, think about that with our team, think about that with my family. I mean, with my kids especially, it's the same thing of
so
teaching.
Much of the stuff applies anywhere,
Yeah. So one thing that's tradition on this podcast that we're going to go through is to finish it off, rapid fire questions. I'm just going to ask you 10 questions.
This is where it could get really dangerous.
And just first thing that comes to your mind. This will be 60 seconds, maybe slightly longer.
All right, let's go. I'm ready.
So in some of these you might have already answered a little bit, but first person you think of when I say servant leadership.
First person I think of? Pat Ferguson.
Wow. Is that your dad?
My mom.
Oh, your mom. Okay, great.
Yeah, right on.
Wow. Okay, 5 words that most describe yourself.
5 words that describe me. Competitive, intentional, determined, likable, conversational.
Okay. Favorite author or book?
I have to go with John Mark Comer right now. Both of his most recent books are excellent. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and I can't remember his most recent title. Really, really good.
Yeah, it was that good. You clearly remember
it. So good, I can't remember the title.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? I just saw A Man Called Otto, and I thought it was really interesting and good.
Is that the one with Tom Hanks?
Tom Hanks, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't really go wrong. Tom Hanks is almost always good. So
yeah. Favorite food?
Favorite food, pizza. I can eat pizza anytime, anywhere. Not cold, though. It's got to be hot.
What kind? Cheese, pepperoni?
No. Okay. Pepperoni pizza. That's the way to eat pizza.
Okay.
I don't eat pork or beef. Okay. So sadly, spinach pizza.
Spinach pizza.
Yeah, and
okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I admit that's not as good as pepperoni. Pizza is meant to be had with pepperoni.
So this isn't rapid fire question, but
Yep.
you're a pastor in Chicago. Lou Malnati's, Giordano's, Gino's East,
No.
Uno's. What's the best Chicago deep dish for everyone watching?
Chicago deep dish.
Chicago deep
is,
dish.
Oh my goodness, Pequod's.
Oh
for sure.
yeah, in the city.
Pequod's,
Yep.
Pequod's on Clybourne. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they have like that crazy crust. They actually line the pan with cheese, and it kind of gets crispy. And
There's always like a 2-hour wait though. I've only had it one
crazy.
time.
Yeah, it's crazy wait.
Favorite thing you do in your free time?
Favorite thing I do in my free time? Read.
Okay. Surprising fact about you?
Surprising fact about me. Yes, I was born in Mexico.
Wow, that is surprising.
Yes.
Okay.
Mexico, Missouri.
Okay. I like
True.
that.
It's a town in Missouri called Mexico. That's where I was born.
I like that. Favorite place you've been?
Oh, wow. You know what? Okay, so this was a pastor perk. I actually had a destination wedding this past summer. Somebody asked me to do their wedding.
Oh, wow.
And it was in Italy. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so great.
That's awesome.
Super fun. So I love Italy. Just about anywhere in Italy.
Place you want to go that you haven't been to before?
I think I want to go to Israel. I have not been to Israel yet.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Will you get there soon?
As a matter of fact, my wife and I were talking about it just the last couple of days. We'd like to I think it's probably going to be 2024.
Cool.
If we could pull it off, yeah.
Cool.
That'd be great.
All right, last rapid fire question. Best advice you've ever gotten?
Best advice I've ever gotten. Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood.
That's good. Wow. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Super appreciate you and excited for everyone to go read more of your books, all
Same
of them.
here,
Tell us
Chris.
real quick about your most recent book or one of the books you think people should read.
For sure. B.L.E.S.S, 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbor and Change the World. What we found is that a lot of folks like you and me, Chris, even if we grew up in the church, followed Jesus for quite some time, when it came to sharing the love of Jesus with people, it just felt awkward or maybe like a bad sales pitch. And so what we discovered is that the best way to love people is to bless them. And, God told Abraham, you were here to bless the world. And that theme of blessing goes all the way through Scripture. You look at Jesus said in the Beatitudes, these are the blessed people. When children came to him, what did he do? He blessed them. So over and over again, Jesus was constantly blessing people. And so bless is an acrostic. I won't tell you what it is. Buy the book, and you can find out what the acrostic is. But it's super simple, practical ways that you can actually show the love of Jesus to your neighbors and friends. And it's really fun to see people picking it up and putting it to work, and lives are changing.
Cool.
Bless-book.org. How about that?
That's perfect. Thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for asking.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.